Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Debo's Den. Today I am lounging in the office wearing a t-shirt and saying yes, I work in a tech company. But before I talk or go into what we're going to talk about today and why I'm wearing this t-shirt, first of all I'd like you to, do the usual. For those of you who are, you know it, just subscribe to this channel, hit the bell button as well so whenever a new episode of Debo's Den comes out, you'll be notified. Welcome and let's go right in. So here's the thing. Today we're actually going to be talking about a topic that it's specifically for startups, and you'll understand in a minute. Today I'll be talking about what we call venture debt. Now, venture debt is something that is slightly different. So one, I'll talk about and define venture debt for you. Two, I would say why venture debt is actually useful. Three, I'll explain how it actually works. And four, just like as before, I like to ask or answer some of the questions that you probably would ask. And if I don't answer those questions, please feel free in this video, in the comment section, ask away. I love hearing from you guys. So please put your feedback in there and all that, and I'll respond in there. So again, let's go straight into it. What is venture debt? So venture debt is a kind of debt that is focused on startups that have actually raised funds. So typically, banks, for example, issue debt. So banks will give you a loan to, grow your business or to do certain things. Venture debt, on the other hand, is a kind of debt as well. But this is a kind of debt that is targeted at startups that have already raised some amount of venture capital. So I probably need to go back through the lessons again. Venture capital usually is investment in equity. So investments they give you some funds in exchange for a percentage of your business. So when that happens, where someone has bought into your business or given you funds in exchange for a certain equity in your business, right? That's an investment, venture capital investment. Now, when you have collected venture capital investment, there's a high likelihood that you need to consistently raise as your company becomes bigger or as you grow quickly. Remember one of our previous episodes of Debo's Den where I spoke about what a startup really is. A startup is a fast-growing company. So if you're a fast-growing company, very likely, if you've taken on capital, you will use that capital to grow very quickly, get to a point, raise some more capital, grow faster, get to a point, raise some more capital, grow faster. Usually, that's how it works. And so essentially, in between those times where, you've taken on equity or equity capital and grown very quickly, sometimes you then need some sort of bridge between the funding that you have there to your next equity raise. That gap between those two rounds, so let's say Series A, or let's even go further, let's take a step back from your pre-seed investment stage to your seed stage to your Series A. So very likely, let's say you've raised pre-seed investment, like you've raised X amount, $500,000. And between your pre-seed, you raised $500,000. And then you're then looking to raise, say, $2 million in your seed stage. So what happens is that you've taken and raised $500,000, you've grown your company very quickly to a certain point, and now you then say, hey, I'm going to raise some more money from my seed stage next year. But I've grown very quickly. So between now and the time that I'm going to raise that seed stage investment, let's say it's 3 months or 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, or even 1 year, you could actually get, there you go, venture debt. So meaning that you've raised money, but you're getting a kind of bridge loan against your future fundraise. And that, my friends, is what venture debt is all about. Stay tuned as I break things down some more. So, I mean, naturally, the question becomes, why do startups actually even need to raise, venture debt? If you think about it, they've already raised some money equity-wise, and they could then say, okay, I have raised $500,000, using the example that I gave. I've raised $500,000 now, and I plan to raise $2 million 12 months from now. But I've taken this fund, I've grown quickly. But yeah, naturally, when you grow quickly, what it also means is that your expenses rise. Yeah, it's sad, but that usually is the way it kind of like works out. So it means that you need funds for a particular period, probably before your next fundraise. The reality is that before that, you could actually go and say, I want to do a kind of like, seed extension. And this is very funny, and I'm trying not to, complicate or confuse people, but let's keep it simple. So you've raised your pre-seed, and then you then say, okay, business is growing well, I've hit the market, I have product market fit, customers are buying things, people are taking on, or it's a subscription, people are taking on the subscriptions. So what next, right? Why should I go ahead and how do I raise money? And so people would probably say, well, I could wait until my next funding round, meaning that I purposely slow my own growth so that when I get to my next funding round, then I then, accelerate things. Venture debt, on the other hand, as I said earlier on, bridges that gap. So the thing is, why should you take venture debt? The obvious reason is that you can actually take venture debt and take on that debt so that you don't have to dilute your ownership pending the time that you get your next funding round. So essentially, you've raised capital, you've grown, the market shows and demands for what you want. You then get to a certain point where there is a gap where you need certain funds. You could accelerate and raise some additional funds, i.e., equity in exchange for a percentage of the business. But if you've already shown that you have product market fit, there's traction, then you could actually take venture debt to bridge that gap to your next funding round. And this is why many startups that are growing very quickly actually take on venture debt. So the thing is, venture debt is actually very popular and common in countries where there's a huge amount of venture capital in existence. However, in Africa, venture capital is relatively new. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but venture capital has just begun blossoming on the African continent only since 2015. So it's still just about 6 years and it's relatively new. So in countries where there's a huge amount of venture capital, it means that there's actually a certain percentage of venture debt. Now, you know what? Even though it isn't that big per se on the African continent, statistics from Get Funded Africa Insights, that's Get Funded Africa's research arm, and you can learn more about Get Funded Africa. I think there'll be a link about Get Funded Africa's learning research and learning insights team here. But the statistics and data from them indicates that in 2021, just last year, the total amount of investment in African startups was about $4.15 billion thereabouts. Now, the very, very interesting thing is that our smart Alex in our research team actually identified and broke down these funds into the types of capital that it was. What was realized was that 8% of the amount of funding that went or came into Africa in 2021, Africa as a whole, was about $323 million. So about 8% of all the funds that were raised on the African continent in 2021, about $323 million was actually venture debt. And the funny thing, it is growing. And it's growing as a percentage of the venture capital investment into the African continent. This is very interesting because according to analyst data and figures and stuff like that, and even predictions and trends, people estimate that investment into African startups will hit about $8 to $10 billion in 2022. What that means is that if you carry that, even just that percentage, over maybe 8 to 10%, you're talking of, say, $1 billion or thereabouts, 800 million to $1 billion thereabouts could potentially be venture debt on the African continent in 2022. I should mention, for startups that are listening and those that understand this, Get Funded Africa currently has partnerships with some venture debt providers. We don't provide it, we're a venture service company, and that's why I can have fun and that explains my t-shirt. So, okay, digression. Forgive me. It's Debo's Den and I try to have fun. So, the thing is that we have some partners that can actually help you if you're interested in venture debt. So please feel free, reach out to us, send us an email, put something in the comment line, and we'll be very happy to discuss our venture debt program. Or just visit our website, getfundedafrica.com, go to our venture fundraising or venture space, and you'll find answers in there. So just thought to just remind you, the venture debt size in Africa is growing, and it looks like it's going to be very huge. So why not take advantage of it? So the question I usually get asked, broadly speaking, about venture debt is, how does it work? Now, your typical bank loans, when you take the debt, general debt from your typical banks, what they ask for usually is collateral, right? And that's how it usually works. So they can ask for collateral, which could be, a fixed asset or something that, can be turned into liquid asset or cash to pay back the loan. Perchance that loan doesn't work. And that's what typically happens with regular bank loans. Admittedly, there are fintechs now that provide loans to individuals up to a certain amount just based on inflows into your banks and what they assess you are and things like that. So that exists. And usually they don't necessarily ask for collateral, but they do it in limited chunks or certain public law limits, right? That's where normal ones work. Now, in the same vein, venture debt is usually structured in such a way that the lenders of the capital have some cover. But again, remember, this is venture debt and not just regular debt. So that cover is usually different from what normally obtains. That cover usually comes in the form of maybe a cash-backed debt, meaning that, for example, you want to get $1 million in venture debt. You've raised $500,000 before, you plan to raise $2 million, and so you then say, okay, that bridge in between, you want to get $1 million for your startup as it accelerates and grows. So that $1 million, it could be that you put in some of the funds. So you've used that $500,000 to grow your business, right? And so you've used the funds, you've grown your business. You probably still have like $500,000, right? Just from the business and the growth and all. So, for example, in this particular case, it could be that you provide what they call cash-backed venture debt, meaning you provide $500,000 in cash, and based on that $500,000, you get maybe about $1 million or so. It's not always that way. Every deal is different, but that's an example. Another way is that you get what we call funding against commitment. So if in your next round, a venture capital firm has said, hey, I'm going to put in $1 million or $500 million in your company. Sorry, I said $500 million. Well, yeah, some of you listening, you can do it. So getting a $500 million investment, meaning you become a unicorn. I'm sure some of the avid listeners of Debo's Den, this could be you. This could be you. So, anyways, so essentially, you can then get maybe one of your investors has committed to investing $5 million, but 1 year from now. So essentially, the venture debt providers, which are usually like registered companies, would give you funds against that commitment that comes up next year. So that's another way that the structure of venture debt can be done. Another one is against your financials. You know how I said some fintechs lend to individuals just based off interaction on their statements. And so in the same vein, some venture debt providers can actually do the same thing. They will take a look at your bank position, your cash position, in and out, your traction, your growth, and have a good understanding of how your business grows, how you would actually use those funds to grow your business. Startups are those companies that have been set up to grow very quickly. And one of the things that startups learn how to do very, very quickly as well is the ability to connect for every dollar that is invested in the company, how much revenue can they actually generate. And so if you're able to show that your business is mature enough to the extent that you already know that for every dollar you get in, you can generate like $5, for example, automatically it's easy for someone to say, if I give you $1 million, we expect that you generate $5 million and with a certain amount of profit. So they're happy to give that level of investment against the commitment, knowing that your business has gotten to a certain level that you know the amount that comes in and you are efficient enough to produce an output based on that input. So that is usually how venture debt is structured. GetFunded Africa is one of the few venture service firms in Africa that can actually help in structuring venture debt for startups, for African startups, and we're very happy to help. So I collated a bit some of the questions that have been asked around venture debt in the last few weeks, and so I'll read some of those questions and provide you kind of like quick fire answers. Okay? So one of the questions that we get asked is, what are the typical venture debt deal sizes that you guys deal with? Okay, that's straightforward. So typically we help on the venture debt side connecting startups to the investors or venture debt providers. And so we typically help anything from $200,000 to about 3-4 million USD. That's today. Although that number could increase slightly because we're onboarding some additional partners as we speak. So this is the typical venture debt deal size that GetFunded Africa is involved in. So it says, how much does GetFunded Africa have in its venture debt investment cycle? So as I said, we're a venture service company, we're not a venture capital company. So we as GetFunded Africa don't have funds that we would invest in your company. That's not the way it works. So what we do is that we take your company and connect you with the specific venture debt provider. So that's why we're a venture service company. Now, note, the venture debt providers that we have combined have liquid assets of over $200 million. So that's a lot of money in venture debt that is available, which is interesting because if GetFunded Africa is able to help to deploy all of that, it's very likely that we would be involved in a significant amount of capital raised in Africa, just as we were involved largely in 2021. So that's the other question and the answer. I hope that answers that. It says, what is the usual deal tenor? Again, this actually depends on the startup. So if you know that you want to raise funds in 6 months or 1 year or even 2 years down the line, then you can actually take venture debt to augment or to bridge the funding period. So the typical the typical tenor for venture debt is usually anything from 6 months to about 24 months. That's the usual thing. I've seen one or two instances where it was longer, but again, this is more of an outlier than the typical timelines. How does Get Funded Africa monetize? Interesting question, and I'll be happy to share. So basically, we act more as a technology platform. So we use our technology to connect the two sides of the business. So our AI and tech can actually help startups that are looking for the right investors. So you have startups on one hand, investors on the other hand, and so our AI and our technology helps to bring those two people together. And for that, we kind of like take a fee, and that's for so people pay a fee for our platform and using our platform because our platform is able to bring these two elements or these two sets of people together. Good question. How quickly do deals close? So typically, venture debt is usually much faster than equity. So typically, deals close within a few weeks. I would say venture debt, you are looking at closing a deal anything from like 4 weeks to about 8 weeks, thereabouts. It's much, much faster than an equity raise and all. So that's typically how venture debt works. And that's kind of like a summary of the questions that people ask around venture debt. So folks, that's a wrap from this particular episode of Debo's Den. I hope you have enjoyed it just as I have enjoyed bringing it to you. Stay tuned for the next episode of Debo's Den. We're looking forward to talking to you. And please don't forget, subscribe. And after you have subscribed, hit the bell button so that you get a notification whenever a new episode comes out. And finally, please make comments. Love, 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 love to hear from you. Take care. Have a great and successful week ahead.